I do a lot of things we would say ad hoc. I do have a couple outlines that I have in front of me. So um, I'm going to begin with, I hope, a little levity. And that's so sometimes I start these things with a joke, and let's hope you laugh, or it can be you can laugh internally, just don't ridicule. So here's the beginning onset. An elderly couple goes into an attorney's office, and this couple is probably 88 and 85, and they've been going to this firm for many years. And this attorney meets with them, and he says, gee, it's really good to see you. I haven't seen you in a number of years. He says, what can we do for you today? And the elderly couple one looks at the other, and they said, well, we're here for a divorce. And the attorney shakes his head, but you've been married over 60 years. What happened? He said, they looked at each other again. He said, well, the children died. And the attorney really says, oh, how unfortunate. He says, sometimes the death of a child really can cause a divorce, but you've been married for 60 years. And the gentleman client said to him, now, I want you to understand. He says, I think you have this wrong. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, the children did die and they did precipitate this. He says, but we would have gotten divorced 40 years ago, except for the children. We didn't want to disappoint them. So with that in mind, that's often the kind of thing that confronts an attorney. We start out what we think is going to be a simple, relatively simple scenario that we've done many times before, and we feel comfortable at the onset. But by the time we get a third of the way into it, we realize that our expectations have been dashed and we have complications. So I'm going to talk tonight what I consider, instead of elder law, but just elder planning. And I'm going to give a brief overview, and then we'll go into some nuts and bolts. And really, it's not a huge group. So if you want to ask questions, basically feel free. But we're going to begin, as I said, kind of an overview. So when we look at elder planning, we're really, to a certain extent, looking at two things. One is obviously protecting the client. And protecting the client often means making sure that they are secure. And when we talk about security, we really talk about two different areas. We talk about health, which I ignore because I don't know anything about it, other than to tell you go to a doctor, make sure you exercise. But I don't go into it because I'm not well informed. And then we go into what we consider asset protection while you're alive and asset protection upon distribution. Well, this evening we're really going to look at while you're alive primarily. So when we look at this, we begin with asset protection. We often begin with insurance. So with insurance, as an individual, when we get older, we have to worry about people taking advantage of our good nature or sometimes our ignorance. We fall prey to this because we're not as quick as we were when we were 20. I had just 3 weeks ago, and I got an email from an attorney I know, and it said, this is an attorney, and she said, I've included an attachment, that I want you to review. And of course, I knew the attorney, and I clicked on the attachment, and that was a no-no. So I wound up having my computer, it wasn't really hacked. It was just kind of annoyance because they then sent out emails from my account. And so that all got settled down. I mean, no one got, but it's a frightening concept of being vulnerable. So when we look at insurance, one of the things I went to, and people don't realize, I went to a whole seminar on an attorney that gave a talk on automobile insurance. And he said that he's been practicing personal injury for 30 years, and he's never had, he says in the 30 years, he only had one case where they used an umbrella policy. However, he's used a number of cases where they had uninsured motorists. Now think about this. A lot of people come along and they'll say, well, what we're going to do is we're going to save because we don't drive reckless, we don't drive a lot, and we really don't need high coverage. Well, what happens if you run into someone, it's one thing, but if someone runs into you, the likelihood that they don't have coverage is getting more and more uh, predominant. So when he said that you should meet the minimum you should carry is 300, because what happens is if you have both property and liability at 300,000 and the person that runs into you doesn't have insurance or is underinsured, they go against your policy. And if you only have 300 for liability and 100,000 for property, then it curtails your rights. And if you ever drive in Florida, they think 1 out of 5 people don't have insurance in Florida. So these are a little hints that I wanted to, make sure you understood. The other thing that we go on and we're going to talk about, and again, very briefly, because I have a lot to cover, is powers of attorney. Originally, powers of attorney were pretty straightforward. We had what we considered standard powers, and that meant you could, buy commodities, you could sell stock, you could buy real estate, and that was a general power of attorney. However, now we have what is known as extraordinary powers. And what does that mean? It means you're giving somebody the power to do extraordinary things. And once we start dealing with the more mature citizens, since I don't know anybody elderly, what does that mean? It means that as we hit certain ages, we have to rely fundamentally more and more on our children, and that's generally the children, to help us and to assist us. Well, under a standard power of attorney, you are limited what you could do because you have a fiduciary duty. And that fiduciary duty says you can't do anything to benefit yourself. Well, if we have extraordinary powers, it says just the opposite. It says you can take care of yourself, you can take care of your siblings. And you can do it by changing the will, changing a trust, creating new trust, changing beneficiaries. This allows the agent that you appointed to do elder planning, which is something that you haven't taken care of yourself. But it also means they can steal you blind. So it's an offsetting things, and we try to build in some protections there. When we also do, a lot of people now have revocable living trusts. They're not unusual. They're the mainstay. It's like everybody used to have corporations or partnerships, and now they have LLCs. So when you have a trust, what we generally have is we do a lot of joint trust, and what it says is the husband and wife are co-trustees. One dies, then the surviving spouse is a sole trustee. Again, when dealing with the more mature citizen, what we often do then, instead of having the sole trustee, we have one of the children step in as a co-trustee. Why do we do that? We do that because to assist the parent, they don't have to ask anything. They can actually, instead of preparing the checks and handing the checks to mom or dad to sign them, they can do it themselves, especially when dementia starts setting in. They are already there. They don't need, they don't need doctors to agree. But the thing is that, again, gives them very substantial rights to commit fraud. And we go through those and we discuss them. One of the things when I meet with clients, well, I want to make this recommendation. Whenever you meet with what you consider a consultant, be it a doctor, a lawyer, an electrician, someone that you're relying on for expertise, one of the things I try to look towards is good communication and affirmative actions upon the person you're asking for advice. So I remember I was seeing one of my doctors, and I said to him, I said, "You and I think, are going to have a problem." And the doctor said to me, and I respected him. He's a very bright man. He says, "Why?" I said, "You're not asking me the right questions. And if you're not asking me the right questions, I'm not giving you the answers I think you need." And I said, that's going to create a problem, because if I leave here without my questions being answered, and a lot of times I don't have enough knowledge to ask the right questions, I said, I'm going to wind up with WebMD. And I don't want to come back in here and argue with you, because I think I'm as bright as you are. And I'm trained in arguing. I'm relying on you to act affirmatively, to look out for my interests. And we want that every time we speak to an electrician. We speak, one of the great things when we look at this community, the fact that I can pick up the phone and get one of the maintenance crew up here to, do a curtain rod, or put in something with, a simple jack or something. It is remarkable, because I have no fear of being taken advantage of. That if they don't know, they'll tell me, and if it's out, so that puts you in a real comfort zone. And that's the kind of thing that we want to permeate many things. We want it with our friends. We want it with, our consultants. But we have to keep it in mind, because we don't keep it in mind, it might not happen. So when we look at what we do here, we are in a retirement community. And if you think about it, what does that mean, and why did we do it? Well, I find it really delightful, because now if it snows, I'm not concerned. I don't go out. I don't have to worry about shoveling. I never really worried too much about shoveling, but I had to hire someone to do the shoveling, which was always a headache, because you were dependent. Would they ever get there? So when we look at retirement communities, what are we looking for, and how, and again, we made that selection, so we're here. What we could have done got to a continuing care retirement community, which is really good for a lot of people. What that simply means is you pay a fee, and in theory, you never have to move out. You just move lodging within the community. If you wind up with a good one, it's really good, but it's kind of like, to a certain extent, the military. If you get a good job, it's excellent. You get a lot of responsibility, or whatever you're looking for at an early stage. But if you get a bad person, or you work for the government, and you get a bad assignment, you're stuck. So what we're going to be looking at now is, we're going to kind of get into what we're really the talk of why I'm here, and that is what we call elder law planning. And what do we mean by that? What is the difference really between Medicare and Medicaid? Well, Medicare really covers acute illnesses primarily. And what does that mean? It means if you have a heart attack, Medicare is going to cover you with your private insurance. It is something that is going to happen, that should have a cure. If it doesn't have a cure, then it's chronic, and now you're into a different bailiwick, because Medicare really doesn't cover you for chronic illness. You can get coverage if you go to a hospital, and go from the hospital into assisted living as well, then, or what would be rehabilitative care. Then you can be covered up to another 90 days. But one of the things that's happened, and you should be aware of this, is if you are admitted, not if you go to the hospital. And what happens is, you go to the hospital and they don't admit you. They say you're here for review. And therefore, you haven't been admitted for 3 days or more. And therefore, you won't be covered. So again, there's a profit motive most hospitals are for profit. They're not a nonprofit. Um, so you should be aware of that. So again, it's one of those catch-alls that if you're not aware of it, it can be costly. So an acute illness isn't covered, a chronic one generally is. So I'm going to catch up on my notes here and see what I'm going. Okay, activities of daily living. Those are called your ADLs, and they come into play if you have long-term care insurance. And generally you have that. That's dressing, bathing, transferring, eating. So what happens here is, do you have long-term care insurance? What is it? Long-term care insurance used to be a lot easier, because what happened was they would have a policy. You would go in and say, I need long-term care. And they say, okay, this is what you're going to get with our policy. You know, you're going to have in-home care. You're going to have this kind of care. You're going to do this. And then you had certain options you could build on top of that. Now they don't do that anymore. What they say is, okay, it's just like buying a car. You're going to get 4 wheels, an engine, a steering wheel, and what do you want? Well, you don't know what you want because it depends who's selling you this product, and it's expensive, and people are very hesitant about buying it. At one time, we thought the government was going to become more socialistic, but of course we ran out of money. So now we're hoping that they continue Social Security. We hope they can continue Medicare, and the likelihood of getting assisted living care is, I would say, pretty remote at this time. Well, of course, we're printing money, so I don't know what we're going to do. But generally, we have to really look at how do we provide for ourselves. There are what we consider life insurance combo plans, where it's long-term care with life insurance. You go in and you give them $50,000 and then or $100,000, and then they say you're going to have this amount of benefit, and if you die, you get $100,000 back. And if you use it, you use it, which is nice. But a lot of us, I can't say most, a lot of us don't have that wherewithal. And if we do have that wherewithal, we say we're going to gamble and we'll self-insure. We're going to go into some happy statistics now, not so happy actually. The average cost of a nursing home in Virginia is $7,350. That's the average. That's not Northern Virginia. 70% of seniors will require long-term care. 50% of couples will exhaust their life savings within 1 year of entering a nursing home. 75% of individuals will exhaust their life savings within 1 year of entering a nursing home. Gets better and better, doesn't it? 25 for healthy people, 65-year-old couple, 25% probability one spouse will make it to 98, and a 50% probability one spouse will make it to 94. So what does that mean? We're living longer. And that we live longer no matter where we are. But our wherewithal doesn't necessarily match that. So how do we pay for this stuff? Well, a lot of people really do self-funding. Well, if you have the money, that'll help. And there are many people who say, well, my children will help. Most children don't think about it. And it's not the first thing they want to spend their money on is taking care of you. So again, we talk about hybrid products. I didn't mention reverse mortgages, which again, we're here. So a reverse mortgage is available and it does help with the cash flow. Now, Medicaid. What are the non-financial requirements to get Medicaid? Well, you must be a U.S. citizen or a qualified alien. You must be 65 or older or disabled. You must be a resident of the state where you apply. You must have a Social Security number. And you must reside in a Medicaid-approved facility. So a lot of times what we do is I'll say to clients that come in, I said, well, what you need is to be able to pay for private pay for 2 or 3 years, a minimum of 6 months in a private pay assisted living place. And when you go into this assisted living place, you want to make sure you pick one with a Medicaid bed. Because what happens is, even though they're not supposed to, they will generally give preference to the people that are paid and were living there versus taking someone in from the outside. Now, what is the difference between a Medicaid bed and a private pay bed? Only the price. So private pay in Northern Virginia is $9,000 a month. Medicaid only pays probably $7,000 a month. They get a discount, but it's the same bed. It's basically the same service. The additional things which money will buy is things we don't really think about. Your allowance under Medicaid for the institutionalized spouse is $40. So all your personal items that you need for a month, you're supposed to take care of with $40. So you can see, you don't really get a lot. The other thing that people don't realize is what we considered normal or average, the Medicaid says, no, that's not average anymore, and it's not normal. So let's assume you can't feed yourself. If you're under Medicaid, they give you an IV. If you had money, they would hand feed you. So is that a luxury? Well, according to Medicaid, generally they consider that this is an economic savings they look at. So now, how do we qualify, right? Well, we have what is known as the community spouse and the institutionalized spouse. The institutionalized spouse, and that's obviously the person going in, is entitled to allow to have $2,000 in assets and $40 a month. The community spouse is allowed to have much more in assets, but basically tops out about $130,000. Now, there's some good news here. There are what is known as exempt assets. So when they look at your assets and they combine the assets of the husband and wife, so even though the wife says everything's in my name and let Bill go into the nursing home, it doesn't really matter. It does matter, because they take all her assets and divide by 2. So now Bill has to spend down his half. The other thing is they'll sit there and people will feel very confident. They said, well, I have a prenuptial agreement, and my assets are my assets, and it's not part of the marriage. It has nothing to do with the marriage. The government says, well, if you want government aid, it does. So they set aside, and Bill won't qualify. So you have to if you want to care about Bill, you have to pay for him. And again, if you're married, that is a financial obligation. You're liable for the medical debts of your spouse. Oh, here we are back again. What could we do? Well, if we look at it, your house is exempt as long as the community spouse is living there. Personal property is generally exempt, but yes and no. Okay, so it's exempt unless it's considered uh, of such high value. So your pictures are exempt because it is personal property. But if you have a Gauguin, that's not going to work. They don't consider that general personal property. So this process that we're looking at is extremely negative. I don't do a lot of it because it is so negative. You are taking, it's not that bad where we're protecting assets, where we're trying to give assets or send some assets to the surviving children. You know, we're manipulating and saying this when we can do that. We can normally get money to go to the children. But again, let's go back to competency. Often we're looking at someone that's suffering from dementia. So here, what I ask, I sit down with the clients and I say, and I'm going to make Bill the person with the problem versus Helen, who's going to take care of him. Is Bill compliant? And if he isn't compliant, if he is obtrusive or obstructive, then we have a different problem because he says, I'm sane. He says, I'm competent. And that power of attorney is meaningless. He's going to wind up with a day in court, right? Because how are you going to keep him there? The court hasn't ruled. And the only way the court's going to rule is if you have a hearing. The fact that a doctor says, he says, yeah, you have a doctor, I'm going to get a doctor. So you wind up with a competency hearing or a guardianship hearing, which is really a problem. And there's 3 lawyers involved. There's a lawyer that's bringing the action. There's a lawyer that is called the guardian ad litem that represents the court. And then there's a lawyer that from the husband who's saying, I'm okay. All those are generally paid from the estate, even if Bill wins. So Bill wins, he is competent, he still pays the other 2 lawyers, as long as the case was brought in good faith. So there are things that we could do to get someone qualified and to keep their assets. The thing that we have that is also very difficult is that everything is extremely precise when you're doing this thing. So if Bill happens to have, instead of $2,000, $2,100, he doesn't qualify, and you start over again. Which, at $8,000 or $10,000 a month is a problem. They have what is called a 5-year look back rule. So it's good to seek counsel. The other thing that I'm just going to mention, which I did a part of the seminar on, is recovery. What does that mean? It means Medicaid has a lien, and they can try to recuperate any money they laid out from assets that exist. There's a law in Virginia that has never been enforced that says the children are liable for the expenses for recovery. It's not really ever been tested. But in theory, if I wind up in a nursing home and Medicaid pays for it, they could go to my children and say, you have to pay it. Again, it's not been tested, but it's on the books. Anyway, this is kind of an overview, and I'm be more happy to take any questions that really relate to you individually. Any questions? I mean, yes.
I thought that there was, I always believed that Medicare and Medicaid, one of the biggest differences was income, that like you had to have a low income to qualify for Medicaid. Is that correct?
No, the answer is the husband or the spouse, in this case, the institutionalized spouse, if your income is above the daily rate for the nursing home, then you don't qualify because you can pay for it yourself. The income from the wife is immaterial. She could be making $400,000 a year. They don't care. So there is an income thing that we have to look at.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, where this really is heartbreaking, and so many people fall into it. You'll have a husband and wife. They're okay. They have a mortgage. They have an income. They've worked their whole life, and all of a sudden, his income disappears because they take it.
Right.
Now she can't pay the mortgage. So there's a minimum monthly maintenance allowance that she's allowed, but that often won't cover the debt. Fortunately, most of my clients don't fall into this realm. You know, their planning is, you know, if worse comes to worse, we can pay for it. And sometimes worse comes to worse, and no one's happy about it. But the myriad of people really, it tears everybody asunder. A lot of people. It is not that uncommon where people will get a divorce. You know, they've been married for 50 years or 60 years. They turn around and say, if I do this, I can get half. I don't want to, you know, we'll still be together, you know. But, you know, the real world intervenes all the time. And you know, it's, as I said, right now, when I look at the world, we're on a 5-year plan. What does that mean to me? It means people get married now for 5 years and then they renew it if it's working well. They get a job. I mean, my son, one of my boys, it was years ago, but he got a job offer from Arthur Anderson. He's a CPA, and he got this job offer, and I job offer. It was wonderful. And they gave him a signing bonus. Like, what are you, a baseball player? And he said, oh, no. Then they called him back about 6 weeks later. They increased the signing bonus. So now he's a bright kid, but he's not, you know, Harvard upper 10%. So now he gets this job. He goes there. They love him, you know, and they're training him. He's doing all this stuff. He's there about a year. And I said to him, well, what's going on? He says, I'm looking. I said, you're already playing for the Yankees. What are you looking for? He says, well, they want me to leave. I said, you're not doing well. He says, oh, no, they like what I'm doing, but they, you know, you go out and you get a different point of view, and then they hire you back at more money. It's an alien concept for me. So there's, you know, we don't promote from within.
There you go.
So it's a different world. So I say to people, you know, what happened, I turned into my father, which is not that bad. I mean, he was a great guy, but you know, I mean, you know, I think like him, you know, so that's where we are.
Other questions?
Hello, I have a question,
Yes.
Mark. Yeah, can't hear it. I'm going back to the beginning. You started off by talking about automobile insurance, 300,000, 100,000 coverage,
Right.
and you're hit by an uninsured motorist. I
Right.
didn't understand what the ramifications of that were. Could you go over that again?
Sure. What happens there is you now rely on your insurance. So you have 300,000 for liability, but you have no, you know, so if you have 100, 300, or 100, 250, you know, if you really want to, for an extra $40 a year, you can get 300, and they can't argue if it's property or liability. So what happens is if you get injured, right, and you have $100,000 worth of medical, or, where do you get it from? Well, you have to get it from your insurance. If you're also missing work or you have, so that coverage is incidental because your rates are really low. And to get the 300, he recommends $1 million, with this guy, because there's a lot of serious accidents. If you wind up in a nursing home where you have to pay for these things, that's coverage. That's what you're going to rely on.
So you're talking just strictly about me. You're not talking about the uninsured motorist and whether he's injured and it's
That's
his
right.
fault and all
No,
of
we're
that.
not worried about him. You can't rely on his, because let's say he has,
No.
you have to rely on your insurance.
Yeah, I understand. No, I thought you were saying the uninsured motorist is going to come against my insurance.
He may have been.
Well, the uninsured motorist could go against your insurance if you're liable.
No,
Yes.
yeah, but I understand that, but I'm saying not
Yeah.
liable. He's out
Right.
and out of luck in that. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Other questions? That happened, Warren, that happened to my husband and me. We were coming home from a football game, you might know, and we were T-boned at a three-way intersection. And we were in West Virginia, but we were almost in the state of Virginia, the back way from Morgantown, West Virginia. And this old farmer in a red beat-up truck hit us. And it was a 3-car accident. Another guy was coming the other direction. Anyway, long story, he had no insurance. And isn't it correct that every state varies? Like he could get by with very little insurance or just a bare minimum in West Virginia. So it ended up that our car was pretty much totaled, and it was a brand new Acura. But the insurance company wouldn't declare it totaled. Long story, our car was in the garage for like 3 months, and you can guess who ended up paying the rental fees in the end. We ran out of rental days on our insurance, because it took so long
Sure.
to fix it, and the insurance company blamed the Acura dealer, and who was the one who ended up paying. So it's a nightmare. And is it correct that it's different in every state, Warren?
Well, yes. Again, these are the things you look at. Each state could be different. Who's responsible? There's no fault insurance in some states. So I'm just saying, generally, when you look at the fact that 1 out of 5 cars in Florida doesn't have insurance gives you an idea of
Do they
what
not
that means.
have to have insurance in
No,
Florida?
I think they have to have it, but you have so many people that are just transient, and
Oh,
Now
I
in
see.
Maryland, one of the things that amazes me is they don't have car inspections.
Really?
No.
Wow.
So you don't know. Each state, so I learned the law in Virginia, and I try to learn all the law in Virginia, but believe me, it's a challenge because it keeps changing. So I'm going to diverge just for a minute. I'm going to give you a little thing. I try to be a very moral and good person. I mean, really, it's just one of those things that I strive for. So in the law, we have what is called ethics. And the bar says if you violate ethics, you can be disbarred. And I was never particularly concerned about it because I figure if you do what you think is morally correct, you're basically covered. So here's what happened. I mean, I went to one of these CLEs, continuing legal education, and this was, and it was on ethics. And this was one of the questions that they threw out to the audience. And this goes back a long time because it covers faxes. And here's what happens. They say, you are representing, I'm going to preface this, that lawyers don't take the Hippocratic oath, but they take an oath or duty that we're going to zealously represent our client, regardless of our opinions. We're going to do the maximum we can to achieve the client's goals. All right, so that's the oath I take. And here's the case. I'm representing the wife in a divorce case. The husband, thinking he's communicating to his attorney, sends me a fax. And in the fax, it describes his adulterous affair, who it was with, how many times it happened, just lays out everything the wife has been claiming that had no proof. So I get this information. What am I supposed to do with it? In my mind, I'm supposed to jump up and down, call the wife and said, we got him, we got him. The ethics committee says, no, that's not right. He thought he was talking to his attorney, and therefore it's privileged. And not only that, you can't even tell the wife you know about it. All right. So now you can imagine if the wife finds out, right? Wife finds out, she's not going to think highly of her attorney that's, keeping secrets from her. Now I'm taking his deposition and I say to him, have you ever had an adulterous affair? He goes, nope. What am I supposed to do? Well, the ethics committee says, oh, you can use it for that. Because someone can't lie to the court. See, the court's special. And it does make sense. But the thing is, there in the law, we have what is the difference between malum prohibitum and malum pro se. Malum pro se says this is a universal wrong. You can't murder. You can't steal. So any society you go to, that's basically going to be part of the law. However, prohibitum means what society says is wrong. Oh, speeding. How do we know? Majority, when you become an adult, different people can think different things. So when we start regulating society by the law, we always run into problems. So the law isn't. The law is interesting. I like it because it's interesting. So, Mike, you have a question or you're just waving?
A little of both. Yeah, I got a question. And this relates a little bit to the dementia discussion you were talking about before. I mean, one of the things about living here is you meet people when they are, fully competent, and unfortunately you can watch them decline over time to the point where they can no longer live here. If you are the spouse of a person who has begun that decline, you are probably going to be totally at sea. You are probably not going to know what to do. You're going to feel kind of alone because you really haven't talked to people like that. So the question that I'm asking is, if you are the spouse of a person who is beginning to decline, at what point should you engage an attorney, an elder law attorney, for help in guiding you through the various decisions that you're going to be having to make over time?
My suggestion is when the first instance that you see that this could be an issue, even if it's 5 years away, is when you go and talk to the attorney. Because there's a 5-year look back rule, right? So if you go within the 5 years, now you have to pay for that difference. Where if you go early enough, that planning is a lot less demanding. You're not under the pressure. There's nothing worse than someone coming in and saying, my husband is going to go into a nursing home at the end of the month. What can I do? And those things happen. So, when we look at these things, supplemental needs trust, where you have a child that you have to take care of not only during your lifetime, but thereafter. How do you do it? Well, these are all done with an instrument called a trust. And that money, a trust, let me just give you a brief overview of a trust. A trust has 3 parties to it. You have the grantor, the settlor, the OR person that's giving the property. And who is he giving it to? He's giving it to the trustee. The trustee's job is to manage that property according to the terms of the trust for the benefit of the third party called the beneficiary. So each trust had those three parties, and sometimes it's revocable, sometimes it's irrevocable. But really, we don't have irrevocable trusts anymore. They're just labeled that. They have past statutes, considering decanting statutes, because what happens is what is perfectly sound today doesn't make any sense 10 years or 20 years from now. So how do you modify it? Can you modify it? Can you change it? And the answer is generally they're modifying the law to accommodate longer lives. And if everybody agrees, then they say, this can be done. So,
Any other questions? Well, it's a realistic topic, not so pleasant, but I'm sure everybody here probably has had some stories that they could tell about their own personal situations with this, with parents and spouses and so on. So if there are no other questions, Warren, we thank you very much. And, you know, you've touched on many topics. I'm sure you could tell us a lot more. So, you know,
well, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I look forward to maybe more joyful topics in the future. You know, trips.
Thank you very much, Warren.
Yeah, but it's realistic. It has, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Guys, any other business? Well, hopefully I will see you in June outside at the picnic. We will let you know. I'm sure Anna will be sending an email. And we're not going to have a program, we're going to party.
Excellent.
Yay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks a lot, Brenda.
Bye. Bye, everybody.